Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am here with my mid-February wrap-up, so I'm going to be discussing all the books that I read from February 1st to yesterday, which was February 14th, which was Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you guys out there, by the way. I read 15 books in 14 days, which is amazing. That has pretty much been my reading pace for the past few months, where I've been reading about a book a day, which is a lot. I know some of you guys have requested that I make a video about how I read so much, so I'll put that on my to-do list. I don't know if that video is going to come anytime soon, but just know that that is coming. So without further ado, let's just talk about these books. I have discovered that it is easier for me just to talk about these books in the order that I read them, as opposed to talking about the one that I like the least, working my way up to the one that I like the most. So yeah, I'm just gonna start with what I read on February 1st, which was The Scandalous Diary of Lily Leighton by Stacy Reid. So Stacy Reid is a Black historical romance author. Just wanted to throw that out there in case you guys are looking for more diversity in the genre. This is a book that I was turned on to on Twitter. I saw someone randomly tweet about how this book features voyeurism and exhibitionism, and that's something that you rarely see in historical romances, so I was definitely intrigued. And you know what? Overall, this was a fun time. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Just to tell you a little bit of what this is about. We have Lily Leighton. She is a widow. She is now working for this Dowager Duchess. I believe that's who she is, as a lady's companion. And then we have Oliver, who is a Marquis, and he is that Dowager Duchess's son. Basically, when this book starts, Oliver and Lily have a one-night stand in a really dark hallway, so they don't know who each other is. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this one. It was a fun and sexy time. Like I said, it does feature voyeurism and exhibitionism, because both Oliver and Lily are definitely into that. Also, something that I did find interesting about this book is that their happily ever after wasn't just them getting married. We see towards the end of this book that Lily is dealing with some infertility issues, so if that is something that might be triggering to you, I would be aware of that before going into this book, but I thought that Stacy Reid handled those issues really well. But yeah, I just kind of liked that we see towards the end the two of them sort of working through those issues and then getting their happily ever after. So yeah, definitely recommend if you're looking for a shorter historical romance that is just a fun and sexy time. Next book I want to discuss is Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. So this book came out, I want to say, in mid-January, and to say I was excited to read this is putting it lightly, because I read both The Hate U Give and On the Come Up by Angie Thomas and just adored both of those books. And the plot of this one sounded so intriguing to me, because this is actually a prequel to The Hate U Give, in case you don't know. This one is centering around Maverick, who is Star's father. If you've read The Hate U Give, you might recall that Maverick becomes a father of 2 children at the age of 17, and so in this book we see how that came to be. So this book is essentially about Maverick and how he transitions from Black boyhood to Black manhood, and I think the exploration of both of those things in this book is just so interesting. I don't think I've ever read a YA novel about a character quite like Maverick and what he's going through. I feel like this book is very unique, and I feel like at this point Angie Thomas can do no wrong. She is a goddess. Her writing is absolutely everything. Also, I want to point out that the audiobook narrator for this did a fantastic job, so I definitely recommend going that route if you like listening to audiobooks. Couldn't give this less than 5 stars. Cannot recommend enough. Next up, I read Zenny by Rebecca Weatherspoon. This is my first book that I am reading by her, and this is a contemporary romance. It is technically book 2 in a series by her, but you definitely don't need to read the first book. So this is about our main character Zenny and her aunt, who was very wealthy. I think she was a pop singer back in like the Motown era. Her aunt passes away, and so in her aunt's will she basically leaves all of her wealth to Zenny, but in order to get her inheritance, Zenny has to marry this man Mason, who became a really good friend of her aunt's before she passed away, and they have to stay married for 30 days in order for her to get this massive inheritance. And so we have Mason, who is this big Scottish lumberjack looking dude. He is the definition of a cinnamon roll hero. He is the sweetest man ever. And I just loved Zenny and Mason together so much from the moment that they meet. Like, you can tell that they just click so well together. This book features, first of all, 2 bisexual main characters, which we love to see that representation. Also, there's lots of communication, lots of consent, and as we all know, consent is sexy. And also there's some pegging involved, so if you're interested in that, this book has it. I don't really have anything else to say about this book. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. I'm definitely looking forward to reading more from Rebekah Weatherspoon. Also, I'm going to quickly mention that I really enjoyed the sense of humor that this book has. It has just a very unique vibe to it. So yes, definitely recommend. Next book I read after that is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is my second book that I am reading from Tiffany D. Jackson, and I can tell you now that she is quickly becoming a new favorite author of mine. She typically writes YA mystery thriller novels, and this one centers around our 2 major characters. We have Claudia and Monday. And so I think they're like middle school age. I want to say they're about like 14 years old. And Claudia and Monday have been best friends, I think, pretty much all their lives. They are very, very close with one another. And when school starts for the fall term, Monday doesn't show up, which is very concerning. And so Claudia is trying to figure out what happened to Monday. And what's very concerning is that a lot of the adults around her don't seem to be very concerned. So Claudia is pretty much on her own in terms of searching for her very best friend. So this book really highlights the very major issue in our society of when Black girls go missing. Especially, there was that event, I want to say a couple of years ago, where there were like 14 plus Black teenage girls going missing in the Washington, D.C. area, and no one was talking about it. It wasn't getting nearly enough press coverage by any means. And so this book definitely brings that issue to light. Yeah, as usual, Tiffany D. Jackson ripped out my heart with this one. It is very hard-hitting, very hard to read at times, but her writing is just so incredible that I couldn't stop reading it. I do want to point out an issue that I have seen a lot of people have with this book is the time jumps, because there are a lot of short chapters where we'll get before, after, 1 year before the before, 2 years before the before, things like that. And I can see how that would become confusing while you're reading this book. But me personally, I tend to just kind of go with the flow when I'm reading books, and I feel like Tiffany D. Jackson was trying to confuse the reader. So I just kind of let myself be confused. And I feel like towards kind of the middle of this book, you finally get your bearings as to what the actual timeline is. And yeah, I absolutely devoured this book. I couldn't give it less than 5 stars. While it is also a very hard-hitting book, like I mentioned, it is also a beautiful story about friendship. Oh man, just thinking about this book is making me tear up. I mean, I cannot recommend Tiffany D. Jackson enough if you haven't read her books yet. Next 2 books I want to talk about are the last 2 books in Beverly Jenkins' Destiny trilogy. I finally read these 2 books this month. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Destiny Surrender. This is technically book 2 in her Destiny trilogy, but with like most historical romance series, you can read them as standalones. Also, I want to quickly mention that this trilogy centers around 3 brothers, by the way. So this one is about Andrew. He is a lawyer. This series takes place in California in the 1880s. And so there is this woman, Billy. She is a prostitute, and they are in San Francisco. Andrew has been seeing Billy for I think a few years at this point, and they really enjoy each other's company. And it turns out that Billy becomes pregnant from Andrew. And so some time passes by, I want to say about a year, and Billy shows up with her son to Andrew's door and, you know, breaks the news to him, you know, this is your son and I need help, because basically there is this really bad man that is after her. And so this turns into a marriage of convenience story. And you guys, to say that I adored this book would be putting it lightly. Okay, Billy, first of all, our heroine, she may be one of my top 5 favorite historical romance heroines at this point. I just love how fiercely she loves Andrew and her son, but also she knows how to use a pistol and starts teaching the women of the local town how to shoot. Like, how cool is that for a historical romance? Also, Andrew is easily one of the hottest historical romance heroes that I've ever read about, and their chemistry together is explosive. Like, it is just everything. Their sex scenes were amazing. And so then I had to pretty much immediately go into Destiny's Captive, which is the third and final book in the series, because I just adored this one so much. But this one is about the youngest brother, Noah. And when he was, I want to say about 18, he was shanghaied. If you don't know what that means, essentially, he was kidnapped and made to work on a ship for this really awful man who is the captain. And even though, you know, being forced to work for this awful man, he definitely went through some really hard times. He also discovers that he loves the ocean and he loves sailing in general. So once he gets free of that awful situation, he becomes a ship captain himself, essentially. So then we have our other main character, Pilar. They are in Cuba at this point. That is where his ship is docked. And she steals Noah's ship from him. And so basically some time passes and Noah tracks her down. And what's even more iconic is that the scene where they actually like formally meet and he confronts her about stealing his ship, they start sword fighting, and it's just absolutely everything. So yeah, as you can probably tell, I absolutely adored this book as well. Again, couldn't give it less than 5 stars. Also, I want to quickly mention that this is another Marriage of Convenience story because there are some bad guys that are after Pilar. Can we sense a theme here with Beverly Jenkins? At least with this series, she definitely likes to put suspense elements in her romances, which I really appreciate. Next book I want to discuss is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. So this is kind of a speculative historical fiction novel about the Underground Railroad as if it was a literal Underground Railroad. And when I found out about the premise of this book, I immediately had to buy myself a copy and read it as soon as possible. And this one essentially follows Cora, who is a young slave on a cotton plantation in Georgia. And we are following her journey from being a slave to getting on the Underground Railroad and eventually being free. But we see the journey to freedom is very treacherous. Basically, back in these times, if an enslaved person escaped slavery, their master would send these slave hunters after them to retrieve them and bring them back to the plantations. And so Cora is constantly trying to escape these people that are trying to capture her, essentially. And I ended up giving this 3 stars. I know. I really wanted to love this, guys. My main problem with this is that it is called The Underground Railroad, and it just didn't feature this literal Underground Railroad nearly enough. I wanted to know more about how it worked, how it was built. I also wanted Cora to like become a worker for the railroad. Like, I wanted her to get involved in that way, but instead she's just a passenger like 1 or 2 times, I think, throughout this book. Don't get me wrong though, I think Cora's story is absolutely extraordinary, and I'm sure that her story was based off of the real lives of enslaved people who escaped slavery. But another issue that I had with this book, I think, is the writing as well. You know, I was really enjoying the first like 70% or so of this novel, but I feel like once it became clear that the Underground Railroad wasn't going to be featured as much as I wanted it to be, I don't know, I just didn't care nearly enough about the story as I did earlier on in the book. So that's why I settled on giving this 3 stars. Do I think it's a bad book by any means? No, not at all. And there are quite a lot of people who adore this book way more than I did. So I would still recommend checking it out for yourself. Next book I want to bring up is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. So this is a YA contemporary about our main character, Liz Leidy. And so she is in her senior year of high school. They live in this town where the entire town takes prom and prom court extremely seriously. Basically, one of Liz's scholarship opportunities for college falls through, and she knows that her and her family are not going to be able to afford college without a very substantial scholarship. And so it's brought to her attention that whoever wins prom king and queen get, I want to say, like a $10,000 scholarship. Like, it's a serious amount of money. And so because of that, she decides to run for prom queen, even though she's definitely not a popular person in school or anything like that. There's also a new girl named Mac that starts going to their school. She also is running for prom queen, and there is a really freaking adorable romance between Liz and Mac, and it's just so wholesome. Yeah, this is just like one of the most adorable YA books that I have ever read. It definitely sparks joy when you read it, and definitely recommend. I gave it 4 stars. It was just a really fun time. Next up, I want to discuss Black Enough. This is Stories of Being Young and Black in America. This was edited by E.B. Zavoy. So this is an anthology of YA short stories by a ton of amazing Black authors. We've got Justina Ireland, Danielle Clayton, Jason Reynolds, Nick Stone, Renee Watson, J. Coles, E.B. Zavoy, the list goes on. And I really enjoyed this anthology. You know, I do think a lot of the time these short story collections can be very hit or miss. Some of the stories are really good, some of them not so much. In this case though, every story pretty much was really strong, and I think I gave each of the short stories at least 4 stars. Also, if you're curious, my personal favorite short story I think was Wild Horses, Wild Hearts by J. Coles. It was just so adorable and wholesome. Okay guys, next is a book that I absolutely devoured and I am just so obsessed with at this point, and that is Happily Ever Afters by Elise Bryant. So this is a book that I got turned on to from Jess from Peace Love Books. I will link her channel up in the cards above. I think she got an arc of this if I'm not mistaken, and the way that she described it just sounded so freaking good to me. So basically this is about our main character Tessa, and she loves writing romance stories, fan fiction, things like that. And she gets into this elite arts high school, which at first she is really excited about, because the idea of getting grades for doing something that she loves, aka writing stories, just sounds like the perfect situation for her. But unfortunately, her first day of class, she gets a very serious case of writer's block. So her and her best friend come up with this plan where Tessa just needs real life love experience in order to write romances again. And so there is this guy Nico who also goes to this art school. He is also in the writing program, and so she sets her sights on him. But there is also this guy Sam, who is Tessa's next door neighbor, who is literally the epitome of a cinnamon roll hero. He is one of the sweetest boys that I have ever read about in any book ever. And so this becomes kind of a messy love triangle towards the middle and end, because Tessa is definitely conflicted between choosing Sam and Nico. And oh man, this book was just so amazing. So I would pitch this to you as To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han meets Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell meets Black Girl Magic. That's essentially what this book is. It is absolutely everything. I love that Tessa is not a perfect character by any means. Some of her decisions are a little questionable. There were moments that I wanted to just shake her and just yell at her to get together with Sam because he's just so freaking perfect. But at the same time, there were moments when I wanted to hug Tessa. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is probably the best YA contemporary romance that I have ever read. Next up, I wanted to read a historical romance that centers around a Black main character that wasn't written by either Beverly Jenkins or Stacey Reid. So I decided to go with An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. So this is book 1 in a trilogy. This one centers around Elle, our main character. She is a spy for the Union. This is taking place during the Civil War. Unfortunately, in order for her to spy for the Union, she has to go undercover as a slave. When she was a child, she was freed from slavery because her master passed away and let her family go free, but now she is back in slavery. And then we have Malcolm, our other main character. He is originally from Scotland. He is also a spy for the Union. They are both spies for the exact same people. But because he is white, he is undercover as a Confederate soldier, essentially. And so it becomes a very angsty romance between the two of them, as you can imagine. I went into this one kind of wary, if I'm being honest, just because of the power imbalance at the time of a white man being with a black woman. I was very worried for Elle's well-being, but I have to say that Alyssa Cole did a fantastic job writing the two of these characters and writing their romance. It truly did make sense that they were together. So I kept flip-flopping between like a 4.55 stars, but needless to say, I really enjoyed this book, and I'm also really looking forward to reading the other 2 books in this series. This book is everything. Okay, next up, I'm going to talk about Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is book 3 in her Brown series. This is the final book in that series, and I got an e-arc of this off of NetGalley, which is how I was able to read this now, because this is not going to be published until March 9th. But this book, you guys, was hands down the best book of the series and the best Talia Hibbert book that I have ever read. And I have read quite a few books by her at this point. So we are centering around our main character, Eve Brown. She is the youngest of the 3 Brown sisters. She is also the quirkiest, for sure. I fell in love with her character in book 1 when she was introduced in Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I knew that I was going to love her romance. And then we have our other main character, Jacob, who runs this bed and breakfast. And he has autism spectrum disorder. He is a very uptight, grumpy type of guy. Basically, Eve's life is kind of a mess right now. She tends to pick these different careers and give up on them when things don't pan out quite the way that she planned to. And so her parents are kind of fed up with her, and they kick her out of their house. And so she decides to just drive around to blow off some steam, comes across the bed and breakfast that Jacob runs and owns, and she ends up getting a job for him as the chef for this bed and breakfast, and things go on from there. I mean, this is top tier romance, top tier contemporary romance. I loved the banter between Jacob and Eve from the moment that they meet. I love how Eve challenges Jacob and his mindset a lot of the time. And there were just so many moments that just made me squeal with delight. Like, just so good. Also, their sex scenes were just chef's kiss. Amazing. I mean, we know Talia Hibbert writes really great smut. I loved the autism representation in this as well, but I would recommend checking out Own Voices reviews if you want that perspective. Can't recommend this enough. Had to give it 5 stars. This may end up being one of my absolute top favorite romances of 2021. That is how much I loved this book. Okay, so Blackathon round 3 has officially started. As I am filming this on February 15th, we are in the middle of that readathon right now because it was going from February 13th through the 19th. I'm going to link Jesse's announcement video for that, probably up in the cards or down in the description below. You guys know the drill. Yeah, I'm having a really great time reading books specifically for this readathon. There's a lot of different prompts. There's also some optional group books, and I have already read one of those group books, which I'll get to in a minute. So the first book that I read for the readathon is The Murders of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson. So this is a horror novella. We have our main character, Molly, who, whenever she bleeds, a new Molly is created. And every time a new Molly is created, that Molly becomes very violent and aggressive towards the original Molly. And so Molly just has to keep killing off these new Mollys. Really interesting, really creepy. I thought the ending was really intriguing. I personally don't plan on reading the second book just because I loved how this ended so much. I kind of don't want to see the resolution of the story, if that makes sense. But yeah, I definitely recommend this if you're looking for a really creepy horror novella that is written by a Black author. So next up, I decided to read The Deep by River Solomon. This was also co-written, I think, by Daveed Diggs, William Hudson, and Jonathan Snipes. This is another novella. It's like 150 pages. This is a book that I kept flip-flopping on whether I would actually read it, because while there are some people that have been giving this rave reviews, there are other booktubers that I follow that have been giving this 3 stars and have been talking about how confusing the writing is. What finally convinced me to read this book was Brie from In Love and Words. I will link her channel probably up in the cards above. She is one of my absolute favorite booktubers. She is a booktuber that also I feel like my reading taste is very similar to hers. Usually if she likes a book, I like it as well. So the fact that she loved this book finally convinced me to read it as well, and I'm so glad that I did, because I couldn't give this less than 5 stars. It was absolutely phenomenal. It's a very interesting plot, to say the least. So this one is about these African slave women that were tossed overboard while slave ships were making the journey from Africa to the Americas. And so when these women were thrown overboard, their descendants, their children, became these water-breathing mermaids, essentially, and they built their own underwater society. We have our main character Yetu. She is the historian of their society. She is the one being that holds all of the memories of their very traumatic past. So as you can imagine, one being holding all of these traumatic and joyful and everything in between memories is very overwhelming, and so she ends up fleeing her society to go to the surface of the water, and the plot goes on from there. The writing from page 1 completely enthralled me. Wow. Like, the audiobook was also fantastic. Daveed Diggs narrated it, and it's just so good. And I do understand where some people are coming from in terms of being confused, because there was a portion of this book where I wasn't quite following what was going on, but by the end everything clicked for me and everything made sense. Last but not least, I want to talk about The Lesson by Cadwell Turnbull. So this is the optional group book for Blackathon, specifically for team science fiction fantasy, because there's 3 different teams for this readathon essentially. I have been picking and choosing different prompts for the different teams. You know, you can really do this readathon however you want to, but I definitely wanted to check out all of the optional group books. Basically, there's an alien ship that rests over Water Island, which is a part of the US Virgin Islands. So for 5 years, the people of the US Virgin Islands have lived with the Ina, a race of super advanced aliens on a research mission that they will not fully disclose. They are benevolent in many ways, but meet any act of aggression with disproportional wrath. This has led to a strained relationship between the Ina and the local village islanders, and a peace that cannot last. And so essentially most of this book we are following one family in particular that is being affected in various different ways by this alien invasion. Basically, this book uses science fiction to explore different themes such as culture, race, colonialism, and humanity in general, and it is just so well done. I personally gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I will say the main climax and conflict of the story kind of underwhelmed me a little bit, which is why I didn't give this 5 stars, because I felt like the build up throughout most of this book was so good. I loved where the story was going, the direction it was going in, but then the ending for me, I don't know, something was just missing for me personally. Also, I want to point out that this does have a pretty open-ended ending, so if you're someone that despises those kind of endings, maybe avoid this book. I personally love those kind of endings because I like being left with more questions than answers in a sense. So do I recommend this? Yes, because clearly I really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people have been giving this 5 stars. A lot of people have been absolutely loving this. All right, guys, that's going to be it for my mid-February wrap up. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video, or if you want to tell me about some of the books that you have been really enjoying this month. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!